Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. I am Raphaella, and I am here today with a very special guest. We have Ola today with us. You've been on the channel multiple times before. We have our Prague vlog, we have our Cameroon family vlog, etc. But please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm Olamide. I am Alexia's cousin, but I'm also a medical student currently in DC, Nigerian Cameroonian, middle sister, middle child of 3 sisters, whatever you guys want to know. I think those are the main things.
The main things, yes. And so as Ola said, she is a medical student. So today you'll be here to talk to us about medicine. This is episode 3, technically, of my graduate series where I invite different, either young graduates, professionals from different sectors to come and talk about their experiences. And I just feel like, although obviously you're still in medical school, your voice would matter a lot, especially for people who are, envisioning that route, etc. So without further ado, I guess we'll just get started with the questions. I will start with a very basic, probably one that you've heard multiple times before. What inspired you to, study medicine and to become a doctor?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. It's definitely multi-layered. But first, I want to say thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I think this series is amazing, and I'm glad that you're giving people the opportunity to be exposed to different career paths and just to have their questions answered. But yeah, so medicine. So I think for me, it started pretty young. So I grew up a little bit all over the world. As your channel, your subscribers know, grew up a little bit all over the world. And then I was exposed to a lot of health inequities. So what that looked like for me was seeing my aunt from Cameroon come to stay with us in Tunisia to get her breast cancer care. It was seeing my grandma having to have her leg amputated because she had diabetes and having to come to Tunisia, and that happened to her. So that was sort of my first exposure to what it looks like when people can't get the care that they deserve and access to that care in their home countries. And then it was also for me a love of science. I really like healing people. I really like providing for people and being able to combine my love for the sciences and bring that into a more a human side in terms of the basic science to the human side of taking care of people was very valuable to me. So I'd say it's those experiences that started my love for medicine. And then multiple experiences over my college. And then when I took my gap year after college, that really confirmed for me that this was the path for me.
And I think you're being quite modest, but I definitely think your intellect as well would have potentially probably swayed you more towards that. Some of us run away from medicine because of the sciences or all the hard work, but clearly, you stuck it out. It's good to recognize in oneself your strength, and then to, sometimes just go for a career that would build and develop the strength further. But yeah, so my next question would be, what do you think is the most important quality for a doctor?
I think this is a very good question. I think if I can cheat, I would say there's a few things. I think it's very important to have a doctor that is empathetic and that can listen to their patients. People are going to come into a doctor's office with a lot of stories, a lot of experiences, whether it's in the medical system, whether it's the system, society in general. And that's going to affect how they receive their care. That's going to affect what they believe about certain things about science and everything. So you have to be able to meet people where they are. So I'd say being able to be a good listener, which requires some level of empathy, is very important. I also think you have to be very adaptable. One of the things that I've learned in medical school is that no day is really going to look the same. There's the routine things, but there's a lot of things that are going to be new situations. There are things that are going to challenge you. And so if you're someone that's adaptable, that's not going to complain, that's going to do the work, and that's going to learn the things that need to be learned for you to do good work is very important. So I'd say those sort of 3 things.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess, to piggyback from that as well, you obviously talked about being able to be adaptable. And I presume, medicine, it's a very pressurized environment. How do you manage with balancing your work life and your, like normal life, especially when you leave the hospital, you know, to kind of tune off? Or how do you manage to handle your stress, for example, your, you know, if you potentially have anxiety, etc., because mental health is obviously a very big thing. And, you know, even with like the pandemic, if we think about that, that was a lot of stress for doctors. You know, the staff to demand ratio was very unbalanced. So how did you manage to kind of like tackle all of that? And what are you like your best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think mental health is so critical. I think wellness and being well in your mind and your body is so important in order to be doing the work that you're supposed to do. I think definitely during my third year of medical school, which is one of the years where you're in rotations, where you're in the clinics, one of the biggest things for me was being organized. So before any rotations, I would put out a schedule. I'd have my little spreadsheets about like what work I want to get done on each day, and put out a free day where I know that because the work was done in the week, I can just relax and rest. And for me, rest looks like watching good TV. Rest looks like working out. Rest looks like talking to my family, calling my family. So I think being very organized to like set aside time to do the things that you want to do without having the weight of your work in the background is very important. But obviously, no week, like I said, looks the same. So being also prepared for the situations where you're not going to get all the stuff done. Like some days you come back, you were taught you were going to come back at 6 p.m. You stayed later and you had to be there. You came home at 7:30 p.m. You may not get to those 3 or 4 chapters or those questions. And that's okay, you know? And so being okay with the unpredictable and giving yourself grace, I think is the biggest thing. And it's very important for your mental health. Like I've learned this year to be confident in what I know, but also confident in what I don't know, where I still need to learn, and also give myself more grace about the areas where I don't necessarily tick all the boxes, so that I can be healthy in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, just to add on to that, sorry, I just thought about something as we were talking. Do you ever have an element of guilt? For example, guilt as in it's your day off and you're called into to the office because someone couldn't come in. There wasn't anyone to, you know, replace whoever was meant to come in. And so it's a matter of, it's your day off and you really need your rest, but then the team also needs you. And so you could go and help, but then to an extent that could be to your detriment. Or you could take your day off, you know, set those boundaries, because I think sometimes it's important to have the boundaries. How would you deal with like guilt in that aspect? Or if you have a patient who, I mean, I'm not sure, you've done some surgeries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with, for example, like a patient that wasn't able to be adequately helped, or a patient that may have potentially passed away, how do you deal with that guilt? Because I suppose that also links into the whole like tuning off, having those boundaries, etc. Yeah.
I would say those discussions and those dilemmas haven't really come up as much, just because I'm still a medical student, and very much while medical students are integral parts of like the clinical team, they are not as integral as like the residents or maybe the attending. So I think our schedule as medical students very much is sort of like set in stone. There have been like times where people have been like, oh, if you want to stay for this learning opportunity, and it's like past the time where everyone else has been dismissed, it's like figuring out, is staying for this going to be very educational for you? And very often it is. But is it going to be at the detriment of you getting a little bit more sleep tonight, or of you being able to get through more questions tonight so that you can understand your patient better because you studied this particular pathology that they have? So I think it's been about making those decisions and sort of like balancing that out. Like you're not going to be able to stay every single day of the week later, but there's a few days that you can stay, especially if it's related to your patient. So I would say it's that, like thinking about how is this going to help my patient? And if this is going to allow me to give better care, then yes, I want to be more involved in this, and I can stay a bit later, or I can come on a Saturday morning because the patient is having a family meeting or something that I want to be part of.
Okay, thank you. And so to carry on, yes, so you have chosen your specialty. So my question is, how did you go on to choose your specialty, and what advice do you have for people when it comes to choosing their specialty? Should they opt for what will potentially give them more for social life? Especially when you think about, especially as a woman, if you want to settle down later, obviously, you have lots of responsibilities. It may be harder to meet people, etc. Or should you follow your passion? If you really want to go for something, should you follow the money? Because I presume in some specialties, there's a lot more money. What would be your advice, and how did you come about to choosing your specialty?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest advice I'd give people is to keep an open mind. Like with hindsight now, so I'm going into OBGYN. So with hindsight now that I look at it, like every single experience I had was OBGYN for me. Like it was very clear when I look back at my CV, like what are the interactions I gravitated towards? What is the type of research I gravitated towards? What is the patient population, in this case, women, that I gravitated towards? And that was very obvious, right? But then when I came into medical school, because of some of the experiences I had in my gap years, a lot of the like patients or the people I saw in the experience I had in my gap year, I actually worked at a shelter for survivors of sex trafficking, where their interface with the medical system was through the emergency room. So I was like, oh, I think I could be an emergency room physician because of those experiences. And then at some point, I also thought about maybe ENT. I thought about general surgery. So I was very open to things. But then in my third year, when I had my OBGYN rotation, I really could see everything coming together. Like, these are the things that you enjoy talking about. This is the sort of like pathology that you like. These are the conversations that you like having with your patients. And so it all kind of made sense to me when I was able to reflect. So I'd say a good degree of self-reflection and a good degree of looking at, if you look back at your CV, what are the experiences that you gravitated towards? How did you feel when you won your rotation? Were you happy to get up every day and do a 12-hour shift? Were you happy if you had to come on a Saturday and do those things? So I think asking those questions. Of course, lifestyle makes a big difference. Like, OBGYN is not the best lifestyle, but I think if you're passionate about what you do, like, those things don't matter as much as people think, although I really understand the value of like more lifestyle specialties. And also I think looking beyond, right? So like residency is going to be hard no matter what specialty you do. You get to craft the sort of attending that you want to be and the sort of schedule you want when you graduate from residency. So looking beyond those things and thinking more like in 20, 30 years, what do I want to be doing? What type of patients do I want to be seeing? And what type of lives do I want to be impacting? I think is very helpful for your specialty choice.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's very insightful. Yes, so you are currently applying for residency programs, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
You have quite a few interviews, thank God. So I suppose my question is, how do people go about applying for residency programs? Like, what should one specifically look for? How does one ensure that, they secure a good residency program? I know that when we were in school and we thought about universities, you obviously had Russell Group universities or Ivy Leagues if you're in the US, and then, the other ones. Does that matter when you think about your residency program? And yeah, roughly how many should you be applying to? Because I suppose for jobs, you really just apply to as many jobs as possible, the ones, that you're interested in, and you just hope for the best, so that you can pick and choose which ones you want. Is that kind of like the same with a residency program, would you say?
I think the biggest thing about applying to residency is figuring out who you are and sort of like what are your goals. That's how I went about it. Was what are the goals that I have for my career, and what are the places where I think that those goals can be met. And then also thinking about what is the sort of like vision that you have in terms of the care. For me, it's being able to be exposed to diversity of patients so that I can be ready in any situations to provide good, equitable care. For me, it's also being able to go to a place that's going to help me with the research that I want to do, that's going to give me skills where I can teach students, where I can be a teacher down the line and an educator. So it's figuring out what you want for yourself and then looking for programs that have this. I would say another thing is very much also looking about where you want to live, right? Do you want to live in the big city? Do you want to be in the more like community feel for your program? Do you want to be in the program that has multiple hospitals? Or do you want to be in a place that only has one hospital? So there's like a lot of factors that come into it for sure. And that's how I made some of my decisions. In terms of like how many places to apply, I think talking to people in your field is so crucial. Like I have a fantastic advisor who gave me advice about where to apply, who told me like what is the balance of like whether it's like a more academic program versus a community program. She told me about programs that I didn't necessarily had thought of that she thought I could be a good fit for. So having someone that knows you well and that can give you good advice about where's a good fit for you or what sounds like a good fit for you is so important. So I'd say definitely those things. With regards to how many places to apply to, there's very good data that's published each year by like the ERAS people, the people who run the residency matching, that tells you like for your specialty, what is sort of like the usual number, the average number of programs that people apply to. But also, once again, I think it's also about understanding what type of applicant you are, right? So if you're like a stronger applicant, you may not have to apply to as many places. Whereas if you are an applicant that's like maybe had some issues with your board scores, may not have gotten the best grades clinically, then you have to apply a little bit more broadly. So it's very much understanding yourself, asking for help, asking for good advice, and then also doing that research and asking where do I want to be for the next 4 years? I'm going to train at a place where I'm going to work hard because I want to learn as much as possible before I'm attending, but I also want to be in a place where I'm going to feel comfortable and supported. So I think those things.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just thought about something else actually. Rotation. You obviously had rotation into different specialties?
Yeah, so there's like core specialties that you rotate through in your third year of medical school.
Yeah, how was that? Sorry, I just randomly thought about that and I thought that would be a good thing to actually explore.
No problem. I really liked it. So the first 2 years of medical school, at least at my school, is preclinical, which means that you basically learn the like basic science, you learn the pathology, you learn the systems. And then so third year is really when you have like a bit more patient care. You have that interface with the patient where everything that you learned in the classroom, you can now apply it into how you deliver your care for your patients. And so for me, everything came together in third year. Like all of the work that I had put in my first and second year to understand a lot of these things made so much more sense in clinical context. It's also where you really see what you're going to be doing as a provider down the line. And it's like taking care of people. And so you get to do that. You get to see how a team works. You get to see how a hospital system works. You get to see also how health infrastructure doesn't work. Like some of the disparities that people face, some of the issues that there are with like insurance, with coordination of care. So everything really comes together. And I think third year is I think the best year of medical school. I also think it's the toughest year of medical school because it's also a time where you get evaluated on things that are a bit more subjective. And so I would say it was a learning process for sure, but I really loved my third year.
Oh, I'm glad. We love to hear it. Okay, and then you mentioned obviously, thinking about which programs to apply for, etc. And most of the advice that you're giving right now is based on US universities and med school. How do you know anything about how they differ from like med schools in Europe, let's say on the African continent, in Australia? If, for example, an international student wanted to go to the US to do their residency program, would that be something that's feasible and possible, or is it not? What route would they need to take?
Yeah, I think there's a significant portion of people that come from medical schools abroad. They're called like international medical graduates. And I think they're wonderful additions to many residencies. They bring a lot of diversity with their experiences. A lot of them were doctors before in their home countries, some not, but all of them bring wonderful experiences. I think the biggest thing that I've heard is like is getting US clinical experience before you apply for residency, just to like on a personal side, to figure out if this is the kind of clinical context you want to grow and train in, whether or not you want to be in the US for that. And also to make connections, because I think it really matters who like recommends you for residency, whether you're a US medical student or whether you're an international medical student. And so making those connections here by doing US experiences is very important. Boards are important. I think step one is going pass fail. So that's going to be very different. I don't know yet what that's going to look like. But step two, doing well on your step two, making sure that you do well on your clinical rotations in general as well. So doing some research as well, like showing that you're interested in like academics or things like that. So I would say all of these things. I'm not as familiar with the process, but that's what I've heard through the like sort of like grapevine.
Okay, great, thank you. And so yes, so obviously the main aim of my series is to encourage and inspire other young graduates out there, or people who are, going to university, choosing what subject they want to do, etc. And whilst you're still in medical school, I was wondering, this is my favorite question to ask everyone. There are inevitably things that you wish you had known before going to medical school, or there are things that you wish you had known before, just choosing medicine as a subject. So what are those? Could you share some of those so that it may potentially save other people from perhaps making those mistakes, or, just being ignorant about those things?
Yeah. I think you have to, before going to medical school, you have to really understand the reasons why you're there. There are multiple times in medical school where you're going to go through tough times, and having a good support system, like the number of times that I actually like called people crying, whether it's like you, Alexia, my mom, like people were just being like, this is a lot, this is a lot. But then you remember like why you're doing this, right? And so knowing yourself very well and being confident in why you made this decision is so important. Then on like a professional sort of like system based, I think the health system in the US is very complicated. I wish I had understood a bit better how complex it is. Although I think my medical school has done a very good job through like their public health curriculum to explain a lot of this of the infrastructure here. But the bureaucracy is it's like complex to navigate. And what really is difficult for me is seeing how that affects like patients and like some of the resources that they have access to, or some of the like inequities in terms of like health access and things like that. So that's something that I wish I knew a little bit more ahead of time. But working through it and educating myself constantly is something that I'm doing. So I would say those things. Personally, it's like knowing why you're doing something and like understanding those very well, so that whatever moment you go through, you can go back to those things and those core values that will then like ground you.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, understanding that the system is a mess, but there's things to fix, and it's always good to have things to fix.
Exactly. Okay, so we're slowly wrapping up. One of the questions that I just thought of, actually, because I remember that a while back we had a conversation which was talking about people who go to medical school, but they don't actually graduate and become a doctor. There are other jobs that you could go into that don't necessarily require, I mean, they require medical knowledge. But yeah, could you just touch upon some of those potentially, just for anyone who's interested or reconsidering their life choices?
Yeah, so there's multiple ways. If you want to work in healthcare, like in the US, for example, there's other ways. There's like physician assistants, and then also like nurse practitioners, who, if you want to work in the healthcare field, and also obviously nursing. But then people who graduate from medical school, I know some people who don't want to practice medicine, for example, who want to work in like consulting, medical consulting, or who want to work in like the pharmaceutical industry, or who are interested in like writing, like doing medical writing. So there's multiple options and multiple things you can do with a medical degree. The majority of people obviously go on to residency and to like practice medicine in sort of like traditional sense. But I think one of the great things about medical school is that it teaches you many skills that you can then apply to a lot of careers. People get secondary degrees. So I know people who are planning to get like a MBA, for example, or getting a master's in public health, so that they can be both like a physician, but also a researcher, or both a physician or someone who's working in public policy. So there's so many things you can do with like a medical degree. So I definitely think that's one of the good perks about going to medical school.
Yeah. Okay. And then my final two questions for you are, obviously you talked about the need to talk to people, network potentially, and for guidance and advice. Are there like renowned forums where, prospective students or like professionals right now can talk to one another just to, get some guidance, some support, etc.? Like, do you know of any, or do you think potentially people should just resort to LinkedIn, finding people who do what they do and talk to those? And then my last question would be, what's next for you? You've obviously spoken about your residency program, etc. And then, what's next for you? Do you think you'll be practicing in the US, or do you think, as an international expat, you'll, move about, work with like different organizations potentially. Yeah, so I'm just interested in knowing.
Yeah, so to the first question, I'd say there are definitely some internet forums that can be very helpful. I think it's important when you're seeking advice to know exactly what you're looking for, right? So if you're looking for specific advice about certain things, it's searching that in that forum, because a lot of these forums can also become anxiety inducing. So like the Student Doctor Network, which is like a very popular forum here in the US for medical students, but also for residents. And also there's some attendings on there as well. So I think that's an area, just knowing what you're looking for exactly and not getting caught up in like a lot of the other discussions that are happening there that can cause anxiety. And then I would say, definitely speaking to people who've done it before. There's also a big contingent of like medical students on Twitter. There's also a lot of medical students who are on Instagram. So like sort of like finding those niche, and also YouTube, of course. And then, so those are really helpful, and hopefully this video can help some people as well. And then I would say the second question is like, what am I thinking of? I think I definitely am excited for residency. So that's the next step for me, is like learning how to be the best OBGYN possible and have the best training, and also figuring out what I want to do. I'm still hesitant about whether or not I want to be a generalist OBGYN or being a subspecialist. And so I'm hoping residency clarifies that for me. I definitely want to do work globally. I think I'm a global citizen through and through, but I'm very also interested in my immediate community here in the US and how I can bridge those two areas of interest. You can do global health even within like your city. Like we're so lucky to be here in the US, where we have such diverse cities, that we have people who come from all walks of life that bring in a lot of their like their stories, and you can do global health even here in DC. So I think those things, and I definitely want to like teach and do some research down the line as well. So I'd say it's a lot, it's a hodgepodge of things, but I'm hoping that with good mentorship that I continue to get, I can figure out what are like my priorities and what is actually like feasible.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. This was such an insightful conversation, honestly. And I know you're going on to do great things. And we're backing you. And we'll all shop together in the objective.
I say a big amen to that. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this platform and for giving people the space to ask these questions and to have their questions answered. And excited to see all of the other people in the series.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Ola. Have a good day.
Bye.
All right, guys. So to everyone who watched, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was insightful. Do comment below, ask any questions if you have. Ola will swing by and, reply to anything, or if you have any feedback, etc. Make sure you're subscribed and you have your notifications bells on if you're not subscribed, because, you need to be kept updated whenever a new video drops, which is usually every Wednesday around 7 p.m. UK time. But yes, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Have a lovely day. Bye.